Hello and welcome to my new Acer 915p 286 machine. A fairly modern looking 286 from the end of 1991. After a good cleaning, a fresh install and the addition of a sound card, this gaming machine is ready to go. Join me on this trip as we take a look at the exterior of this PC, as well as look at its internals. We'll do some rework to get the PC up and running again. And we'll also do some memory upgrades and add a little bit of multimedia to the PC. And of course we'll play some games at the end. But first, let's rewind a couple of days when I first got the machine and when I turned it on for the first time. My apologies for the not so period correct monitor and keyboard, but it was all I had at hand. I was pretty happy with the fact that it booted, although it did say that the battery was dead, which was as expected. But I did hit one little quirk as I entered the BIOS. So I was able to navigate on the first screen, so I wanted to set up the machine. But when I hit the main BIOS screen, it basically hanged on me. None of the fields were filled in and I couldn't change anything. So I was pretty bummed with that, as I was not able to boot the machine using the hard drive. Now I was able to start the computer using an MS-DOS boot disk. So when hitting F1 to continue, I noticed that the computer was starting just fine. But obviously it didn't detect the hard drive, as the BIOS setting didn't accommodate for that. So I wasn't able to do much testing at that point. Before we open her up, let's take a look at the exterior. We have the Acer logo, a reset switch, a power LED, hard drive LED, 3.5-inch high-density disk drive, and a weird, what seems to be 8-inch bay, and of course the power button. On the side of the case, we have two PS2 connectors for the keyboard and the mouse. To the back, we see that we have the power supply with a fan, both an input and an output power socket, a parallel port, 9-pin serial port, a 25-pin serial port, and our VGA connector. There are a couple of dents in the case, like you can see here on the back. And also on the top of the case, there's a really small dent here. The machine needs a bit of a cleaning, but overall it's in really nice condition. So let's open her up and see what we have inside. So once the screws have been removed, the case comes off fairly easily. You just need to slide it over a little bit and then take it out. And then we can look at the internals of the PC. So we have a pretty standard layout for this machine. We have the disk drive, hard drive, power supply, and of course the main board, which sits underneath everything. We have a riser card for the ISA slots. So on the main board, we have 4 SIM sockets to upgrade the onboard memory, which is 1 megabyte. We have an onboard VGA card hooked up to the main board using this connector, and a riser card with 4 ISA slots. So here we have a different view of the graphics card, which is this area here with the VGA connector, and a jumper here to enable or disable this video card, because you can put an external one. And this white connector attaches the video card to the rest of the main board. We also have a standard AT power supply which outputs 100 watts. It uses the standard AT connector that we use in other PCs. Every component includes this Acer sticker, including this Connor hard drive, which is an 85 megabyte IDE hard drive, and the disk drive is from Panasonic. So here we see the little PCB that holds the reset button, LED displays, and the PS2 connectors. Now to access the motherboard, we'll need to remove the drive tray that holds the disk drive and the hard drive. So in order to do that, we just need to unscrew a couple of screws here at the front. And once that is done, it just slides out of the case. Now I have no idea what the tray beneath the hard drive and the floppy drive is for. It's like an 8-inch type of bay, but I have no idea what to put in there. This main board has an integrated disk drive controller and IDE hard drive controller. So here we have the Intel CPU, which is a 286 12 MHz CPU, optional floating point coprocessor. The power button on this PC is pretty special in the sense that it hooks up to the main power supply like this. But let's go ahead and remove the power supply so that we have a better view on the main board. I'll also remove this thing here that holds the riser card in place. And with that out of the way, we have full access to our main board. Going to remove the PS2 connector interface, the reset switch, and the front panel LEDs. There is no external PC speaker on this PC, but it has the PC speaker embedded on the main board like so. I'm also going to remove this riser card here, which gives us 4 16-bit ISO slots. Probably going to use this to add a Sound Blaster card and also an external VGA card, just to compare it with the current embedded VGA card. So on the main board we have the 2 BIOS chips, the 1 MB of onboard memory, and 4 SIM sockets. We also have a Dallas real-time clock, more on that later. This computer comes with an integrated disk drive and hard drive controller on the main board. We have the Intel 286 CPU. The 286 CPU from Intel has had quite the run. Introduced in 1982 and achieving mainstream adoption with the IBM AT in 1984, it can even be found on this Q3 1991 PC. PC has a very modern looking main board and a lot of integrated features like the integrated controller, the integrated video card. We have 2 BIOS chips from 1991, 1 MB of internal memory using these 8-DIP chips, and 4 SIM sockets to have an additional 4 MB of memory. Now the integrated VGA card is a graphics card from Akumos. It's the AVGA1 320. It was later rebranded to Cirrus Logic, and it performs a little bit above average when comparing other cards from that era. It's not as fast as the ET4000, for example, but it should do. But the main focus of this video will be this Dallas real-time clock chip, which is totally dead right now and is preventing me to enter anything in the BIOS. So we'll need to remove this chip from the main board. Now, in order to do that, we need to unscrew a couple of screws here to get the main board out of the case. So we'll just gently slide it out of the case here, like so. So as you can see here, the PC is in really mint condition. There is virtually no dust or dirt on the case itself. Now I'm also going to be removing these PS2 connectors, as I do want to hook up a keyboard to the main board, and as the main board is out of the case, it becomes very difficult to do so otherwise. So here we have it, our Acer completely disassembled. As you can see, there aren't that many components, as a lot of stuff is integrated on the main board itself. So let's go over everything. We have our PS2 connectors here for the mouse and the keyboard. We have a really nice sounding Connor 85 MB hard drive. We have a 1.4 MB disk drive, our riser card for the 4 ISO slots, standard AT power supply, and the main board with integrated video card, disk drive, hard drive controller. It's a fairly modern looking main board, not something that you would typically associate with a 286. Here we have the integrated video card. We have some onboard memory here, 1 MB. We have our integrated disk drive and hard drive controller. Let's focus on our Dallas RTC chip. Now this is a package that basically holds a battery which is inside of this epoxy housing. So the battery is now dead and it's completely impossible to recharge it. Now there are some hacks that you can apply to an existing chip, in the sense that you can hook up an external coin cell on it, but this is not the route that I'm going to be taking here. It is perhaps the cheapest solution, although you need to have an external coin cell holder and a coin cell battery, but it does require some work. You need to butcher the existing chip. It's not that aesthetically pleasing to look at. So I've decided to just spend my hard-earned cash on a new Dallas RTC chip, because there are drop-in replacements for the existing one. And here I have such a replacement chip. So this is a DS12887A Plus chip, and it has the exact same pinout as the older revision, which was the 1287A chip. and we're just going to be removing the existing one and putting in a new one. So let's flip the board around and locate the pins that we will need to free up in order to remove it. Now I'm going to be applying some solder to the solder joints here on the existing Dallas RTC chip, as that should make the desoldering process a lot more easier. I'm going to be using this desoldering pump. This is a fairly cheap way of removing components from a PCB, and for components like this, it's really well suited. I think you could go for more expensive equipment, but most people don't have that at hand. The desoldering pump works nice. You just have to make sure that you get all the solder out, you bend the pins a little bit so that you will be able to extract the Dallas chip. And using a screwdriver here, as you can see, it is fairly simple to remove the component from the PCB, even without damaging it too much. It's normal that the pins will be a little bit bent, but as we are no longer planning on using this chip, we basically don't care anymore. I am going to be putting a socket on the PCB, so I'm not going to be soldering the new Dallas chip on the board directly. So for that, we're just going to be removing the excess solder from the PCB, because we want to ensure that all of the pins on the socket will make it through the PCB here. So I'm just going to be placing the socket here, and as you can see, everything goes in quite smoothly. And then it's just a matter of soldering the new socket onto the main board, like so. And then we can just pick our new Dallas RTC, place it into the socket, and do a quick test. So let's hook up our PS2 connector so that we can attach a keyboard. So I've hooked up the power supply to the main board. I'm just going to be turning it on to see if I can enter the BIOS. So let's hit the system information setup, and as we can see, all the fields are properly filled in. We can navigate around this screen and we are good to go. So we'll now place the motherboard back into its case. Again, when looking at the main board and the case, it doesn't really look like a 286 at all. It looks like a fairly new modern PC, in fact, but yeah, what can I say? It is a full-fledged 286 12 megahertz. So we'll also attach our riser card onto the main board. So it's nice that we have some additional expansion slots available. The PS2 connector, which uses a custom connector, of course, to hook up to the main board. It's funny how I always associate PS2 with more modern computers, but it was actually introduced in '87 by IBM. We also need to hook up our LEDs and buttons on the front to the main board, the PS2 interfaces, and add our power supply. So the power supply uses the standard AT connector, so we'll hook that up to the main board, making sure that the black wires are placed inwards. We'll also add the drive bay again, so containing the disk drive and the hard drive. I have no idea what that area underneath the disk drive and the hard drive is for. It's too big for a 5¼ inch device, so the only other standard that I know of is an 8-inch standard, but I have no idea why this would be on a computer from this era. And then we have the power button connector that goes all the way to the power supply using this metal rod thing. So now I'll do a quick test to see if it actually works, if we can boot from the hard drive. So I've configured the hard drive here using a custom user setting. So we specify the cylinders, the head, and the sectors. And we'll see if we can boot the PC. I actually wasn't able to boot from the hard drive, so I needed to boot from an MS-DOS boot disk. When I loaded up fdisk, it did see the partition, but it was only 72% used. I was able to read from the hard drive, so perhaps it wasn't configured correctly at the time, or they were always using a boot disk to access the hard drive. I don't know. There were a couple of games on it, so I gave those a little spin. and everything seemed to work. But the idea is to format the drive completely now, install a fresh copy of MS-DOS onto it. I found some old 1 megabyte SIM modules, so I decided to give these a try. I really don't like these types of connectors as they are really hard to fit these modules into. I'm always afraid of cracking the plastics. But after some trial and error, I was able to put all of the modules in and I was able to boot the machine. So when booting the machine, it was able to detect the additional 4 megabytes of memory that was installed, bringing the total memory up to 5 megabytes. After the memory count was over, it did say that there was a memory size mismatch and we needed to go into the setup utility to confirm our new memory setting. So as you can see here, we have 640 kilobytes of base memory and the rest is set to extended memory, giving us a total of 5 megabytes. So there aren't that many options in the BIOS setup utility. You can set up stuff like disk drives, hard drives, serial port, parallel port. You can also set the CPU speed to various speeds, but I didn't notice a difference in performance. Now I am going to make use of these 4 Acer slots and I am going to be adding a sound card. Now I have the Sound Blaster 16 lying around here, which should fit the system nicely, but I am going to try something different and, believe it or not, opt for these cheaper Vibra 16 sound cards. They are a lot more common and I guess a lot of people will have them as opposed to a Sound Blaster 16, which is getting very difficult to find. Now this Sound Blaster 16 has the Yamaha OPL3 chip included on it, which gives it a very distinct sound, something that the Vibra 16 doesn't have. But these cards are getting a lot rarer and a lot pricier when searching for them online. Now these Vibra 16 cards are a lot more common. You can pick them up a lot easier and a lot cheaper. So I am going to be trying these because I assume that most people will have these kinds of cards lying around. Let's place the card in one of the free Acer slots, and you do have to keep in mind that these more modern sound cards, these kind of plug and play sound cards, they don't work well with 286 machines. In order to get them to work, you need to install a little piece of software which emulates a 386, and this is this EMU386 that you see here. It's a small device that you need to add into your config.sys, and it will emulate some opcodes from the 386, allowing you to install this particular type of sound cards. And here we go. After some cleaning, some memory upgrades, and a sound card upgrade, our little 286 PC is ready to rock. I think it cleaned up pretty well. I like the aesthetics of this case. It doesn't really have a 286 feel to it. It looks like a fairly modern PC, but it is in fact a 286. I really like the desktop case. I like the fact that you can only add a disk drive and nothing else. I just like the overall look and feel of the case. So to conclude this video, I'm just going to show you some gameplay of various games that I have installed on this machine. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel to keep on supporting it. And I hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.
Get ready.